Hello and many thanks for joining us. Here are the stories making headlines beyond the continent. I am Felicity Ezewike. We begin in America, where Donald Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, returned to the witness stand on Tuesday for a tough grilling by the ex-president's lawyers at his historic hush money trial. Cohen, who served as Trump's fixer for years but is now a bitter foe of his one-time boss, is the prosecution's star witness at the first criminal trial of a former occupant of the White House. Trump is accused of falsifying business records to reimburse Cohen for a $130,000 payment to porn star Stormy Daniels before the 2016 election, where her claims of a sexual encounter with the Republican candidate could have doomed his campaign. The dramatic courtroom face-off is taking place 6 months ahead of the November presidential election, in which Trump is hoping to recapture the White House from President Joe Biden. U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson says the justice system has been weaponized against former U.S. President Donald Trump. Johnson made this known while addressing reporters outside the New York court where the former president is standing trial over hush money payments to an adult film's actress. Johnson said the system is using all the tools at its disposal to punish one president and provide cover for another.
It's impossible for anybody to deny that looks at this objectively, that the judicial system in our country has been weaponized against President Trump. The system is using all the tools at its disposal right now to punish one president and provide cover.
President Joe Biden is increasing tariffs on $18 billion in Chinese imports across a handful of sectors deemed strategic to national security, an attempt to cripple Beijing's development of critical technologies and instead prioritize U.S. production. The increases will apply to import steel and aluminum, legacy semiconductors, electric vehicles, battery components, critical minerals, solar cells, cranes, and medical products. The new tariff rates, which range from 100% on electric vehicles to 50% for solar components to 25% for all other sectors, will take place over the next 2 years. Lyle Brainerd, director of the White House National Economic Council, says China is using the same playbook it has before to power its own growth at the expense of others. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson expressed their reservations on Tuesday regarding the introduction of punitive custom duties on Chinese electric vehicles in reaction to America toughening on this issue. These comments come at a time when Washington announces a sharp increase in custom duties applied to Chinese products. Asked to react to this decision, the German Chancellor stressed that 50% of imports of electric vehicles from China were today the product of Western manufacturers. Concerned by competition from Chinese electric vehicles on the European market and pressed by France, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, announced in September the opening of an investigation into Chinese subsidies for electric cars. Rivers in South Brazil rose anew on Monday as flood rescue efforts intensified, and President Lula da Silva considered authorities had not prepared for a disaster of such magnitude. More than 600,000 people have been displaced by heavy rains, flooding, and mudslides that have ravaged southern Rio Grande do Sul state for about 2 weeks. At least 147 people have been killed and more than 800 injured in the deluge, and 127 people reported missing. Hundreds of cities and towns and part of regional capital Porto Alegre, a bustling city of 1.4 million inhabitants, have been underwater for days, with streets turned into waterways.
Peguei uma de outubro e essa da agora. Perdi tudo dessa vez.
Já tá? Sim, a gente foi resgatar que eles estavam lá já há 6 dias, já sem comer. Daí a gente foi lá, eles estavam morrendo de fome, a gente deu ração, daí a gente trouxe de qualquer jeito pra cá.
De novo?
Eu tô ansioso que a água baixe pra mim não limpar a casa, pra recomeçar do zero de novo. E o carro? Entendeu? Perdemos tudo. perdemos carro, entendeu? Mas estamos indo, força de vontade. Eu sei que todo mundo vai se ajudar, todo mundo aí.
Então eles...
O que tava na casa do meu pai agora que sobrou, né, das coisinhas, daí a gente foi buscar do jeito que tá a previsão aí. Aí agora estamos tirando o que sobrou pra não perder tudo, né? Já perdemos muito.
Let's head to Europe, where Georgia's parliament on Tuesday adopted a controversial foreign influence law that has sparked weeks of mass protest against a measure which Brussels has warned would undermine Tbilisi's European aspirations. Lawmakers voted 84 to 30 in favor during the third and final reading of the law, which was widely denounced as mirroring repressive Russian legislation used to silence dissent. The vote came as street protesters skirmished with riot police outside the building in the center of the capital, where demonstrations have taken place over the last month. Around 2,000 mainly young protesters gathered outside Parliament and chanted no to the Russian law as news spread that lawmakers had adopted the law. To further discuss this, I'm joined by Ejike Okpa, Global Affairs Analyst. Ejike, thank you very much for joining us. How does the adoption of these laws impact Georgia's relationship with the European Union, and what steps can be taken to mitigate any potential negative consequences?
Thank you for having me. I think, nations have the right to decide what laws they want to adopt, to pass. I don't know, in the case of Georgia, if they have a recourse. Because what happens is that, if they do that recourse, they can go to a constitutional court, because this is just the legislature passing a law. So what they can do is now sue and begin to expose either the negative aspect of the law, why they don't need it, and then if the Supreme Court passes it, then, passes it for the protest people, then it's not going to uphold. But if they don't do anything, if it's an authoritarian sort of regime, then the law, stays. But what you see now across the globe is, where, rich nations support what they call the NGOs, and through these NGOs, they begin to gather information or have influence on their domestic countries that doesn't go well for the national government. I think it's for the sake of disclosure. Anybody who is going to get money from a foreign entity to do anything needs to disclose it to their national government. For instance, in America, we have what we call the Foreign Agency Registration Act. So, for instance, if I'm going to lobby on behalf of Nigeria, I'm going to have to disclose that. Don't, it's a federal crime, and I can be tried, and then if I'm convicted, I'm going to jail. So I support those things, so that way people know who is paying who. This is a case of who pays the piper dictates the tone. So we'll see what happens in Georgia. I'm hoping that, hey, somebody will challenge it to a court, and then see whether the law will stand.
In what ways might the foreign influence law be used to silence dissent, and what measures can civil society organizations take to protect their freedom of expression?
Well, again, the case of who pays the piper dictates the tone. If you're receiving money from an organization, it comes with terms and conditions. It comes with requirements. It comes with expectations. And because of the economic challenges in this country, when they receive $1 million or something less than that, a lot of them are, that's their livelihood. They are willing to do something that may be anti or undermine their own national government, because somebody's paying them. Somebody's keeping them and giving them that money. I think it's going to go both ways. The most important thing is that anybody who is going to be receiving foreign money is supposed to register it and disclose it. And then what is the mission of this money? What are you trying to get? It's not just the spies that spy on countries. Sometimes, citizens of a particular country, through their conducts and activities, maybe sharing information with their foreign interest, and those things go to undermine their own, living standards. So, NGOs, again, if it happens in their country, they should get together and file a lawsuit against their national, higher courts and say, hey, this is unconstitutional. And then if they win, they win. If they don't, maybe they come up with, that disclosure requirement that if you receive money, you have to tell us who you got it from.
How might the adoption of this law impact foreign investment in Georgia, and what steps can the government take to reassure investors and maintain economic stability?
Those are two parallel things. You remember, this money is for NGOs. The NGOs are non-governmental agencies. In America, we call them non-profit. I don't think it's going to affect investment because foreign direct investment is about revenue. It's about returns. It's about a particular project. Investors might say, well, if you don't have a law that is that strict and restrict people's ability to participate in the economy however they choose, they may pull back. But investors are driven by returns. The politics of it, oftentimes they find a way to go around. So in my own estimation, I don't think it will. Because, for instance, coming into America to invest has nothing to do with a whole lot of laws. You just look, what is the stability and the security of my investment? If I put $1, what am I getting back, and what is the guarantee that I'm going to get that back? The other local politics and issues oftentimes doesn't affect investors because investors are money driven, and return is what drives their motivation.
All right. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you for having me.
French Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin condemned in the strongest possible terms the violence affecting fellow New Caledonians and denounced riots committed by delinquents and criminals after a night of riots in the French Pacific territory. The unrest erupted on Monday as protesters demonstrated against a constitutional reform being debated at the National Assembly in Paris that aims to expand the electorate in the territory's provincial elections. In the meantime, New Caledonia has imposed a curfew and banned public gatherings in the capital after a day of protest around the French territory against planned changes to the constitution turned violent, with reports of widespread looting and businesses set on fire.
Je veux dire qu'au moment où le Parlement discute, puisque nous reprenons les discussions tout à l'heure, je veux condamner de façon extrêmement forte les violences qui touchent nos concitoyens calédoniens, des émeutes commises par des délinquants, il n'y a pas d'autre mot, parfois par des criminels, de ce que nous en constatons, et le courage des policiers et des gendarmes, et notamment je voudrais penser aux gendarmes et à leurs familles dans les brigades territoriales, notamment au-delà de Nouméa, puisque je constate qu'il y a eu 54 policiers et gendarmes blessés, dont certains gravement, des familles...
French Prime Minister Gabriel Attal has also condemned riots in France's Pacific territory of New Caledonia, in which businesses were burned and shots fired at police, saying violence is never a solution. He added that the government's priority is to re-establish order, calm and serenity in New Caledonia, where separatists have been angered by planned voting reform.
Ici devant vous, la violence n'est jamais une solution. La violence n'est jamais justifiée ni justifiable. Évidemment, je veux apporter un soutien à ceux qui ont été touchés par ces violences, qui ont été blessés, apporter un soutien à nos forces de l'ordre et à celles et ceux qui ont été visés par ces violences. La priorité, évidemment pour nous, c'est de rétablir l'ordre, le calme et la sérénité. C'est la raison pour laquelle le ministre de l'Intérieur a annoncé l'envoi de renforts avec cet objectif, l'ordre, le calme et la sérénité.
United Nations Department of Safety and Security staff has been killed and another injured in an attack on their vehicle in Gaza on Monday. Farhan Haq, deputy spokesperson for UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, made this known during a briefing at the UN headquarters in New York. The deceased and the other surviving staff were traveling to the European hospital in Rafah when their UN vehicle was struck.
Of the death of a United Nations Department of Safety and Security staff member, an injury to another DSS staffer when their UN vehicle was struck as they traveled to the European hospital in Rafah this morning. The Secretary General condemns all attacks on UN personnel and calls for a full investigation. He sends his condolences to the family of the fallen staff member. With the conflict in Gaza continuing to take a heavy toll, not only on civilians but also on humanitarian workers, the Secretary General reiterates his urgent appeal for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire.
Today marks the 76th anniversary of the modern state of Israel, as Israelis rejoice but remain mindful of the war raging on in the Gaza Strip and on the Lebanese border. Independence Day in Israel, celebrated on the 5th day of the Hebrew month of Iyar, commemorates the signing of the Israeli Declaration of Independence. The declaration was announced and signed by David Ben-Gurion and signed by members of the Provisional State Council on May 14, 1948, by coincidence the date in May on which this year's celebration also occurs. It was hailed as the first instance of Jewish sovereignty over parts of the land of Israel since the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem nearly 2,000 years earlier.
אנחנו גאים בעצמאותנו, בנס שהוא מדינת ישראל, אבל ליבנו מלא עצב וכאב. אנחנו בימים אלה מלאי כאב של שכול, כאב של פצועים, כאב של אזרחים עקורים מבתיהם, כאב של חטופים. לא ננוח ולא נשקוט, לא ננוח ולא נשקוט, עד שישובו בנות ובנים לגבולם.
12 people were killed and at least 60 injured after a billboard collapsed during a fierce storm in India's financial capital, Mumbai. Officials made this known on Monday. An excavator was digging through the wreckage as rescuers raced to find any survivors after the signage collapsed at a petrol station in the city's east, trapping dozens of people underneath. Gaurav Chauhan, an inspector with the National Disaster Response Force, said 8 bodies had already been removed from the wreckage, while 4 more bodies are still buried inside the debris.
We have taken out almost 8 bodies, okay, and now we have just located 4 bodies, as I told you earlier. 4 bodies are inside, we have located them, but we cannot remove them due to this petrol pump, and the situation can be hazardous.
It's been created. This is not a disaster. Okay? If this hoarding would have been properly installed, if the foundation would have been that strong, so this casualty would have not happened. This area is a marshy land, and it is also a low-lying area. So when in such a kind of marshy land where they have to install such kind of huge hoarding, the installation itself, the foundation of that hoarding should have been gone more near the rock.
And that's all on Beyond the Continent at this hour. You'll send your eyewitness report to the number on the screen. You can also follow us on social media at News Central TV. You can watch live on DSTV channel 422, Star Times channel 274, Apple TV, and on YouTube. Thank you for watching.